What's the scariest 100% true story you've heard of? Before we start with the first story, please hit subscribe and ring the notification bell to stay updated with us. Story 1. In the 1990s, a nurse in New Jersey hundreds of hospital patients. Sometimes he would sneak into patients' rooms at night and inject them with fatal medication doses. Other times, he would put the medication into IV bags in the supply room so they would whatever random patient they were given to later. He was accused several times. Some patients pointed him out before they died. Some staff thought he was creepy and dangerous and refused to work with him. He kept getting fired from hospitals, but the hospital managers knew that if he got arrested, they would be sued by the families of the patients so they just fired him and didn't call the police. That happened at 12 different hospitals over the course of 16 years. Investigators believe he many as 400 people. After he was arrested, he confessed to 40. In 29 of them, he gave enough detail to be charged and plead guilty. He is linked to 300 plus more deaths than that, but details of those will probably never be known because so much information was lost over time or destroyed by the hospitals. Story 2. I was around 10 years old. I was at school, but my mom told me she was thinking of taking me to the doctor's in the afternoon. Recurring eye issue. Lunchtime, and I'm in the dining hall when the office woman told me there was a taxi outside for me and I needed to go. I assumed my mom booked it for me as she can't drive. I cleared up my stuff and got my bag. Just about to leave when I remembered my jacket in my classroom. I rushed to get and head out for the taxi. Office woman tells me I'm too late and the taxi has gone without me. I just went back to class, but panicking my mom would be angry at me. School finishes and my mom is waiting for me at the gate. I burst into tears apologizing for missing the taxi and thinking I was in big trouble. She never ordered a taxi and had no clue what I was talking about. She ended up not making the doctor appointment. No one ever found out who ordered the taxi or who the driver was. My mom doesn't like to think what would have happened if I hadn't forgotten my jacket and got in that taxi. TLDR, missed a taxi I thought my mom booked for me, only to find out it could have been an attempted kidnapping. Story 3. Well, it's my story. When I was a little kid, 5 to 6, we had this neighbor like grandma to me. I'd go over and have snacks, and she had a Mr. Potato Head I played with. That was her, now adult. Son's talk. Weird core memory. He came home in his 20s from the army, I think. I don't remember much about him, but he asked about taking my older brothers camping, but my mom said no. She had a weird feeling about him. Side note, we lived out in the country, not even a town, just a place. There were no locked doors. Everyone trusted each other. My mom saw him at our little store with bee stings all over and was concerned. He said he got him at the creek. She thought that was weird because that's just not a thing where we went all the time, but okay. A little while later, not sure how long, the news said there was some campers out past where we lived, no leads. People were shocked. This doesn't happen here. My mom remembered her weird feeling and the bee stings that didn't make sense. She called the police to say, hey, probably nothing, but here's what I got. I remember detectives coming to our house to talk to her. They had some other evidence that matched, but not enough to link him to a couple with their child. It's unsolved to this day, though the detective said he knew it was him. A few years later, the guy went to prison for an abduction attempted of a woman who ran out of gas and he offered her a ride. She lived, thank God. Story 4. My grandfather's village was razed by the Nazi. He had 9 siblings. The Nazis came to the village in retribution due to guerrilla attacks, and they believed the guerrillas were hiding there. Most young men fled before they arrived. The men that were in the village were lined up against a wall and shot. My grandfather's mother put half her children, the youngest, in the cellar, and she took the other half with her because the Nazis were rounding up the entire village and locked them inside the church. The reason she had split her children was because she feared they would all be so she wanted at least some of them to survive. The Nazis ransacked and burned nearly every house in the village, including my grandfather's. He was in the cellar with his siblings and their house burned above them, but they were saved. Those in the church also survived, but many didn't. After this, the Nazis would come again some time after and pretty much force all the young men and boys, including my grandfather, to help make roads and fortifications for them. Despite it all, they all survived the war, though many in the family didn't. Story 5. So when I was around 18, I went to town to drink something with my friends. We went all in, and by 2 a.m., I was completely wasted. Couldn't see, walk, or think straight. one of my mates remained sober to drive us back home. We went to the parking lot and I could hear a voice whimpering somewhere in the dark. I turned around and saw two guys carrying a girl to a car. I got closer and now I could hear her voice. She obviously was drunk, but she repeated no and I don't want over and over. Adrenaline kicked in and I became sober instantly. I screamed at them and immediately called the police. I wasn't fast enough so they could get in the car and drive off. But I saw the license plate, gave it to the woman I talked to at the police station, and they informed me about 10 minutes later that they arrested the two guys. The whole scene was so terrifying. This was in Germany, story 6. My college girlfriend called me one night. The Baton Rouge serial killer had been active a while and she was being followed all over town and even after going in circles by a whole truck, which the supposedly drove. She fit the victim profile. She was a brunette living in house sitting for her aunt, a wealthy neighborhood. My roommate and I drove over and we filed in line behind her and the truck. She lived essentially on the LSU grounds, so I assumed it was a stupid student prank or something. She parks at her aunt's house. Truck stops one house short of her aunt's and we pull in behind her. I explain I'm going to defuse the situation. Walk over to the truck. The FBI says, the white guy. This man is African American. Explain no one is upset, but he's freaking out my girlfriend. He needs to leave. He looks side-eyed at me and drives off. I see the guy again a few months later. On the cover of the Baton Rouge paper, he's been arrested. He was the Story 7. The case of the Clutter family murders, told expertly by Truman Capote in his book In Cold Blood. What really gets me about the case is that all it took was one person knowing the family to make the connection that ultimately ended their lives. Floyd Wells, a former employee of the father, told his cellmate about the Clutters, and that inmate, Richard Hickok, became convinced the family had a fortune stored in a safe at their house. Upon his release, Hickok contacted another former cellmate, Perry Smith, and they planned to rob the family. There was no safety and no fortune. Instead, the pair left with a small radio, a pair of binoculars, and less than $50 cash, along with the lives of Herb, Bonnie, Kenya, and Nancy Clutter. A quote from Hickok talking about Herb has especially stuck with me. I thought he was a very nice gentleman. I thought so right up to the moment I cut his throat. Story 8. Up to this day, I'm still looking for a logical explanation to this. This happened in 2003. So I and an ex were checked in a coastal resort where the cottages were far apart, like 200 meters away. Around 11-113 p.m., while we're both drinking beer with the lights turned off and only the TV on, the doorknob suddenly rattled violently, like someone was forcibly trying to get it open. There was no double lock on the door, so my first reaction was to jump from the bed and block the door with my weight. The force of my landing must have been heard from the other side, but the twisting of the doorknob continued. By this time, I was already pressing my face to the floor, trying to estimate how many people were outside the door via the small gap between the floor and the bottom of the door. There was nothing, not one pair of feet or anything, but the doorknob just kept rattling. I should point out that the gap between the floor and the door was enough for me to see the outside, or at the very least notice any change in shadow light caused by movement. But there was nothing. The turning of the doorknob then stopped, but I never heard any footsteps or any other noise. Waited a few minutes and opened the door. Everything was quiet. No footprints outside or on the sand surrounding the cottage. We just noped out of there immediately. Story 9. When I was 17, I was hanging out with two friends and they wanted to go smoke weed in the woods. I didn't feel like it, so I drove them and waited in the car. After a while, I was getting bored and decided to go meet them, but there were 4 paths going off in different directions, so I just took the biggest one. After walking for a few minutes in the pitch-black forest, before flashlights on phones, I come across this dip in the trail, and on the other side is a bench lightly visible due to the moonlight. On the bench is sitting a man and another one is standing in front of him, but I can only make out silhouettes. Being sure these are my friends, I yell out to them before walking over. If you ever walk the woods at night, it's just an uneasy feeling all around, so I was cautious to begin with. Well, it turns out, just after yelling out to my friends, both silhouettes turn around towards me. Not a word, not a sound. The guy sitting down starts sprinting full f***ing speed towards me in complete silence. I got the absolute f*** out of there, sprinting also the other way and tripping over because I couldn't see anything. I finally got out and locked myself in my car, but I was really worried for my friends. Maybe a minute later, I see them both coming out of a completely different path. They also confirmed they never saw me or anyone else. My heart still sinks just thinking about that dude sprinting in silence. What the was that? Story 10. My brother was dating the love of his life up until a few years ago. They met because they both worked in a restaurant. He was a piano player, she was a waitress. Things were going amazingly between them. The only problem was, she had a jealous ex. He knew when they left work and what shifts they'd work since it was the same each week. He decided for whatever reason he was going to teach my brother a lesson for dating his ex and planned to attack him with a Stanley knife when he left work one evening. That night, my brother and his partner were getting ready to leave, and he stopped for a second to talk to a colleague, meaning she left first. As soon as she stepped out the door, he slashed her throat and then ran. She in front of him. That attack was meant for my brother. He's gone through a lot of therapy and down some very dark paths since then, but is finally coming out of the other side of it. But it's terrifying how close I came to losing my little brother, and how much he lost as a consequence because of some fucking deranged nut job. If I could get my hands on that guy, I'd get locked up myself. But he's in prison for a long time, and so far he's staying there. Story 11. When I was April 18, 2024, my friend and I went to the movies and then decided to walk home. It was a bit of a walk, but we didn't want to pay for a cab. I'm always pretty vigilant when walking, especially at night, so I noticed a guy with his hood up walking behind us. Every so often I'd look over my shoulder to check on him. He started pretty far behind us, but was gaining ground weirdly quickly. The last time I turned my head, I caught him sprinting at us. I panic and tell my friend to run for it. She's in those fucking Birkenstock slip-on sandals that were popular then, and she's struggling to run, so I'm dragging her until we get to a gas station. I bang on the window and beg the clerk to let us in, but he says he can't because it's past a certain time at night, but he promises if the guy comes near us, he'll call the cops. The guy comes down the hill, through the gas station, staring at us the entire time. I swear the only reason he thought better of it was because the gas clerk had the phone visibly in his hand. Plus he was a big guy. I completely broke down after he left. Just the thought that he was running at us while I had my back turned scares the shit out of me. What if I hadn't turned when I did that last time? Story 12. I remember one night I woke up gently from my slumber with my trusty red little Playmate cooler under my arm with me in bed. Just like normal, I thought. Then I thought again. I don't own one of those coolers and pop, it's gone. I'm now aware and in sleep paralysis and fully freaked out. I do my best to roll over off my back, and with a huge surge of strength, I throw my right arm across my body so hard that I roll off my bed and faceplant on the floor. I remember falling towards the floor in slow motion. The instant I hit the floor, instead of feeling the floor, I was back in my bed laying on my back, but this time the demon was at the foot of my bed. I'm fucking terrified. I try to scream as the silent scream rips through my throat. The demon pulls me off my bed by my feet. I landed on the floor and woke up back in my bed. I focus all my strength on wiggling my toes, and finally I'm awake in bed, snuggling my kitty. I can move. I'm free. That was my crazy sleep paralysis story. I don't know how I managed to roll over and go back to sleep that night. Story 13. Back in 2019, I was in a place in Thailand for people who got caught on drug using .it, like a prison for children. One day, the new prisoner transfer in. He was a young 17-year-old boy with good skills in sport. He is the best player of country badminton club. The second day he arrived, he come to me and say, "Hey, you want to escape this place with me?" I refused. Next day, we all are called to gather in the center hall, and his body is lying there and cops everywhere. There, the story is, after I refused to go with him, he does the escape thing itself at night. He climbs through the wall, then starts swimming across the river, but at last he couldn't make it. The police said he drowned like 12 hours before someone saw his body. After the thing happened, I was in shock for 2 weeks. My mother has to take me to another hospital. Rest in peace, my friend. Story 14. A man disappeared in front of me. I was at a summer camp, and my group was returning to our dorms later in the night. 5 or so people. As we were stumbling up, a man in dark clothes was walking towards our dorm, and we called out to him. Never got a good look at his face. But there weren't many adults at the camp, and this guy starts off into a dead sprint and disappears into a large shrub of bushes. Me and my buddy had ran after him thinking he was a fellow camper. Rushed into the bushes about 5 seconds later at most, and nothing. He disappeared. The closest building was not accessible from the back where he went towards, and a smaller bathroom. The area behind it was woodland, and it was completely illuminated. You make a lot of noise running through woods as well. He completely vanished. No way we wouldn't have spotted him in some fashion. Everyone was weirded out. Still can't explain it at all. Story 15. The story of Kyle Plush. He died in the back of his van in his high school's parking lot. He became caught after the third row seating flipped up and trapped him upside down while he was reaching for his tennis bag. He was able to use Siri to make 2 911 calls. The first dispatcher sent police to the school and they searched the parking lot. About a half an hour later, he made a second call where he gave identifying details about the color, make, and model of the van. But the dispatcher did not relay this information to the police, who were at the school at the time. He knew he was dying by the second phone call and asked them to pass a message to his mother. Later that night, his father used Find My Phone to track him and found the van in the parking lot. He had suffocated. He died because the police did a half-assed search and the second dispatcher thought it was a joke. Alright folks, that's a wrap. If you like more of this, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. You can also share your thoughts in the comment below. I'll see you in the next video.